After a tense confrontation with my mother-in-law, where she harshly criticized my job and educational background, things took a shocking turn. In an unprovoked outburst, she threw hot water at me. Though I narrowly escaped injury, the potential for harm was clear. I was stunned by her extreme reaction, especially considering that it was my husband who was unemployed, not me. The growing resentment toward her behavior became overwhelming. I couldn't take it any longer. Enough is enough, I thought. If this is how it's going to be, then I have no choice but to leave. To my surprise, my mother-in-law seemed almost relieved by my decision, showing no remorse. Unable to stand the toxic atmosphere any longer, I made the decision to return to my parents' house. What she didn't know was that, since leaving my job, I had become the main financial provider for our household, making around $41,000 a month through stock trading. I was confident that I could take care of myself, even without her approval. Eric and I met in college, where we both studied economics with hopes of building careers in finance. After landing jobs at separate brokerage firms, Eric eventually proposed, and I happily said yes, excited for our future together. But everything changed when Eric asked me to quit my job and move in with him and his mother after his father passed away, so she wouldn't be alone. Though I hesitated, I agreed, hoping it wouldn't cause any problems. Now, after everything that had happened, I deeply regretted my decision and vowed never to help my mother-in-law again, even if she faced financial struggles. Eric's relationship with his mother had always been complex. After his father died when he was in middle school, he became his mother's only companion. As an only child, he was extremely concerned about her well-being, and I respected that. So, when the time came to move in with them, I agreed. However, my mother-in-law's reception was less than warm. While she was initially happy to have Eric back, her attitude toward me was cold and distant, her unspoken disapproval clear from the start. I tried to brush it off, but there was a palpable tension in the air. Living with her proved far more difficult than I had anticipated. One morning, I was rudely awoken at 5 a.m. by her yelling at me to make breakfast. "Don't just lie around because you're not working," she scolded. Although it felt absurd to be woken up so early, I kept quiet and began preparing the meal. As I worked, her constant criticisms echoed in my ears. The breakfast took 25 minutes to prepare, but it wasn't enough. She complained about the time, then about the soup being too salty, though I didn't think it was. "What are you trying to do? Poison me with this salty food?" she accused. Her words left me stunned, and I couldn't help but question her intentions. I finally asked, "Why are you so harsh on me?" She denied it. "What are you talking about? I don't think I'm being harsh. Are you trying to make me look bad?" I didn't argue back. "Finish eating and clean up, then do the laundry," she ordered, her tone as demanding as ever. From that point on, every day felt like an endless series of criticisms and chores. No matter how much I cleaned or how carefully I did the laundry, she found fault. "You missed a spot," she'd say, or "there's still a stain." After a month of this, I felt utterly drained. I finally decided to talk to Eric. "It's about your mother," I began, hesitantly. "She's been so critical, and it's becoming too much. Could you talk to her?" But Eric's response wasn't what I expected. He looked pale, as if burdened by something heavy. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned. After a long pause, he finally told me, "I've been fired." I was stunned. "What? Are you serious?" It turned out that his company had downsized due to an economic downturn, and he was let go. "So you'll be unemployed starting tomorrow?" I asked, still in disbelief. "Well, I have a month left." But after that, Eric trailed off. Fortunately, he had been trading stocks using his knowledge from his time at the securities company. Despite the initial struggle, he was now making about $41,000 a month, so we wouldn't be financially unstable. I reassured Eric, momentarily putting my mother-in-law's harsh treatment out of my mind. The days dragged on as I continued to bear the brunt of my mother-in-law's harsh treatment while Eric remained unemployed. Despite my best efforts to support him, I found myself growing increasingly weary. A month had passed, and Eric's job search had slowed to a standstill. He seemed to spend more time at home, offering excuses rather than making real progress. "Shouldn't you be looking for a job more seriously?" I suggested, trying to motivate him. "I'm looking, but it's tough to find something that fits me," Eric replied, his tone lacking any urgency or real commitment to the search. I reluctantly continued to be the primary breadwinner. As the days wore on, my mother-in-law's harshness only intensified, and my energy began to drain. At first, I had justified enduring her treatment because Eric wasn't working, but that reasoning was losing its weight. The The days felt like an endless cycle, and I began to lose any sense of purpose. One morning, for the first time in weeks, Eric left the house early, possibly to finally start his job hunt. I seized the moment to focus on my chores, but my mother-in-law's nagging was never far behind. "Make sure it's clean, do it properly," she called out from the living room, sipping her coffee and tossing sarcastic comments my way. I was done, so I ignored her. That's when her temper flared. "How dare you ignore me? You're just a daughter-in-law, and you don't even have a job," she yelled. I kept cleaning, trying to block her out, but her anger only escalated, and soon she was shouting again. "Still ignoring me? Unemployed and uneducated people like you should leave this house." Before I could respond, she grabbed the hot water she had prepared for her coffee and splashed it on me. The scalding water burned, and I screamed, "It's hot, please stop." I was in shock, but thankfully, the water wasn't boiling, so the burns weren't serious. Still, the act could have been disastrous. "This is what I've been saying," she spat. "If you're not working, leave this house." Her words were cold, and her smirk was venomous. I was at my breaking point, and with no other choice, I said, "Fine, I'll leave." "Good, that makes things easier. Leave quickly," she snapped, not even offering a hint of remorse. I packed my things and left that day, determined not to endure another moment in that toxic environment. I headed straight to my parents' house. They were shocked to see me, but they welcomed me without question. I waited for a call from Eric, but it never came. No calls, no messages. Feeling isolated and uncertain, I decided not to reach out until he contacted me. A month passed, and still, no word. My feelings for Eric began to fade, and I seriously started considering divorce. Then, one morning, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I checked the monitor and couldn't believe my eyes. Eric and my mother-in-law were standing outside. "What now?" I muttered to myself, confused and frustrated by their sudden appearance after weeks of silence. I spoke through the intercom. "Yes? What can I do for you?" "I've forgiven you. Come back home now," my mother-in-law shouted, her tone as harsh as ever. "Forgiven me?" I asked, bewildered. I hadn't done anything to need forgiveness from her. After a moment of confusion, I ended the call, my frustration boiling over at her presumptuousness. But they didn't leave. They began banging on the front door, demanding I come back. "Don't hang up on me, let's go back," my mother-in-law shouted. Worried that their noise might disturb the neighbors, I reluctantly opened the door and invited them inside. After seating them on the living room sofa, I asked what this was all about. It was especially odd since it had been my mother-in-law who had insisted I leave, and now she was asking me to return. I couldn't make sense of it. "You told me to leave. I can't come back now," I said firmly, frustration clear in my voice. She accused me of being childish and insisted that I return, claiming she had forgiven me. She even went so far as to say she'd allow someone unemployed and uneducated like me to stay. "But I'm not the one who's unemployed. It's Eric," I shot back, trying to make her understand. "And if I go back, you'll just take advantage of me every day." "What about your son?" Eric looked stunned. My mother-in-law appeared confused, realizing that Eric hadn't told her about his job loss. Finally, Eric admitted he had been laid off. Apologies and explanations followed, with him trying to justify his silence by saying he relied on my income to support us. My mother-in-law was taken aback, her anger shifting toward Eric for not finding a job sooner. "Why did you keep quiet about this? What are we going to do now?" my mother-in-law scolded Eric, her anger palpable. Eric, still trying to smooth things over, assured her that my income would be enough for the time being, but this only led my mother-in-law to berate him further, calling him worthless for not actively seeking employment. I was fed up with all the excuses and felt completely drained by the whole situation. The idea that they expected me to return and pretend nothing had happened was simply too much to bear. When my mother-in-law suggested I come back, I refused without hesitation, considering all the mistreatment I had endured. The atmosphere quickly grew tense as the truth about her boiling water incident came to light. Eric was horrified to learn what his mother had done and demanded an explanation. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. She admitted to it, claiming that it was because I had ignored her. This revelation sparked a fiery argument between them, and I found myself stepping in, urging them to take their dispute back to their own home. It was clear their loud bickering was causing discomfort in my parents' house, and that seemed to shift their tone. Once assertive and domineering, they now began pleading with me to return, promising no further trouble. But I wasn't fooled. Eric's promise to find a job lacked any real sincerity. and my mother-in-law's vow to change seemed equally unreliable. "I don't believe you," I said firmly. "You'll just take advantage of me again. You can't be trusted." They sat in silence, and after a while, I left them in the living room to reflect. When I returned to confront them 10 minutes later, they were still seated quietly, their heads bowed. I was frustrated by their silence and broke it. "How long do you plan to stay quiet?" "It doesn't matter to me anymore," I said, my patience completely worn thin. Instead of responding verbally, I handed Eric a document I had prepared, a pre-filled divorce form with my name already signed. Eric looked at it, shocked and confused. "What's this?" he asked, clearly caught off guard. "It's a divorce form. I'm done with someone who won't get a job and didn't even contact me after I went back to my parents' house," I said bluntly. "Don't do this. It's too sudden," Eric protested, his voice thick with disbelief. His stubbornness and lack of understanding only irritated me further. Unmoved by his pleas, I stood firm. I had made up my mind to move on and end the turmoil. My decision was final. Eric hesitated, still in shock. "Isn't this too harsh?" he asked. "No, it's not, and it's your fault," I replied sharply. My anger was directed not just at him but at my mother-in-law as well, who had contributed to this mess. Reluctantly, Eric signed the papers, warning me not to regret it, but I felt a deep sense of relief. I knew the one who would regret this wasn't me, it would be Eric. "I'm submitting the divorce papers. I don't want any compensation, just go home," I declared, putting an official end to the marriage. Though it seemed harsh, it was necessary for my own well-being, to escape the constant harassment from my mother-in-law and the strain of Eric's unemployment. 3 weeks later, as I enjoyed a quiet day at my parents' house, I received an unexpected call from my former mother-in-law. She informed me that the electricity and gas had been cut off at her house and implied that I might be responsible. I explained that I no longer covered Eric's and her living expenses since the divorce, and she begged me to help for just 1 more month. I found her request absurd. We were no longer related, and I no longer lived there. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Ask Eric," I said firmly, refusing her plea. Unwilling to accept my refusal, she continued to plead, trying to use the ex-wife card. I ended the call and blocked her number, determined to sever all ties. I was done with both her and Eric, the people who had caused me so much pain. Life at my parents' house became peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. I began to enjoy the serenity, free from the toxic environment that had defined my marriage. The days felt lighter, and I reveled in the quiet, appreciating the freedom I had regained. Months later, while checking stock charts on a holiday, I received an unexpected message from Eric. He apologized for everything, acknowledging his past dependence on me and mentioning his new job at a factory. Despite his apology, I felt no desire to reconnect. Eric also mentioned that his mother's behavior hadn't changed and asked me to come back. Reading his message, I knew without a doubt that reconciliation was not an option. I blocked his number, choosing to permanently close that chapter. 8 months after the divorce, things finally began to look up. A friend introduced me to a new man, kind, dependable, and respectful. Despite our age difference, we shared a strong connection and a sense of happiness that I had long been missing. While we weren't rushing into marriage, I found joy in our time together. He brought stability and peace into my life, and with him, I began to truly rebuild. I looked forward to each day, no longer weighed down by my past, ready to embrace the future and all that it might hold.